All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We will be discussing the subjunctive in more detail. This is the second part of the two-part subjunctive webinar series. Part one was presented recently. You can find that on our YouTube channel and on our academic resources page. And if you did attend the first one, you should have had received an email with a recording. My name is Dan, and my colleague Zach is here to answer any questions you may have throughout the webinar or at the end, so please send those in at any time. If you do have any questions for us as you're working through your Spanish course, our contact information is on the slide in front of you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you at any point with any questions you might have about your course material. Okay, on the slide here, you can see where you can send your questions in if you do happen to have any as we are presenting today. Okay, so in today's webinar, we will continue with the subjunctive and transition from regular verbs, which we discussed in part one, to irregular verbs and the various subjunctive tenses, as well as commands, which will be a topic as we go on. So we're going to begin with the 5 irregular verbs in the present subjunctive tense. Okay, and these 5 on the screen here, dar, estar, ir, saber, and ser, those are the only 5 irregular verbs in the present subjunctive. And you can see their conjugations within each conjugation chart. Okay, the top 2 are the only that have accents, dar in first and third singular, and estar in all but first plural. So there's really no rhyme or reason to these conjugations. They have to be memorized. Right, they're definitely a good verb to be mindful of. They will come back up later in our discussion on commands. So these are irregular verbs, but only in the present subjunctive tense. And here are a couple examples using the irregular verbs. If you think back, or if you have never really learned much about the subjunctive before, there's a lot of uncertainty involved with using the subjunctive. So when somebody hopes that something's going to happen, or wishes, or says it's possible that something will happen, or doubts something will happen, or asks for something to happen, all of those are contexts that trigger the use of the present subjunctive. So all the verbs in the Spanish sentences here that are underlined are in the present subjunctive because they haven't happened yet. They may not ever happen. All right, it's possible that they happen. It's hopeful or doubtful that they will happen. Typically, the first verb is in the present tense, triggering the present subjunctive tense. Okay, so one example for each of the 5 irregular verbs. Okay, that's really all there is to irregular verbs in the present subjunctive. All right, now we're going to transition to a different type of verb known as the stem changing verb. Okay, and stem changes occur in quite a few tenses. Okay, and we've talked about them in previous webinars. I'm sure you've read about them in your course material if you've gotten that far so far. But for now, we're sticking with present subjunctive tense and breaking down AR and ER stem changes which occur within the boot. Sort of see that in the examples at the bottom of the screen, and eventually we will transition to IR stem changes. All right, so AR and ER verbs that stem change in the present subjunctive, those stem changes occur in the boot, and there are 3 types of AR and ER stem changes, which you can see in the middle of the slide. You have the E to IE type, which pensar is an example of, O to UE, poder is an example of that, and hugar is an example of U to UE. So again, the stem change is where a vowel in the stem, everything before the AR or the ER, or eventually before the IR, the vowel undergoes a sort of spelling change, but specifically known as a stem change. And you should notice that IE present within the boot-shaped arrow-laden diagram. And each of those, in first plural, the stem change does not occur. And that's just like present indicative tense. Okay, and one thing about hugar, it's a little bit unusual. All right, it also will have a spell change, which we'll talk about later. That's another type of verb in the present subjunctive. So apply these stem changes, these vowel, to other vowel changes within the boot, not in first person plural. That would be a regular conjugation, except for hugar, where there's a spell change as well. And these are just three of the more common verbs. You'll definitely see them come up in your course material. Okay, and here are some examples using the AR-ER stem changing verbs with pensar, poder, and hugar, as we just saw in the previous slide. Again, there's hope, implying uncertainty. If something is likely to happen, still implying uncertainty. And if it's uncertain that it'll happen, more uncertainty. That's why all the underlined verbs are in the present subjunctive, because they have not happened yet. Okay, as we transition, all right, we're talking now about IR stem changes in the present subjunctive, separate from the AR-ER group. But within the IR group, there are two types. We're going to call them type A, as you can see here, and then we'll call them type B. All right, they're not strictly boot changes like the AR and ER verbs had on the previous couple of slides. In this case, all right, for verbs that are type A, sentir and dormir, two examples of this type, there are two different stem changes within one conjugation. So you have the E to IE type, that would be in the boot, shown in yellow. And then you have just the E to I only, also a stem change, but a different stem change, and that's shown in green. And the same trend applies to both of these groups, E to IE/I and O to UE/U. As you can tell in dormir, you have your first stem change, O to UE, in the boot, shown in yellow again, and then remove the E, just an O to U stem change in first person plural in green. Okay, so it can get a little bit confusing, but you're not going to see a whole lot of these verbs. There's not that many. All right, sentir and dormir are probably the two most common, and those that you'll probably see come up within your course materials, specifically dormir, more so than sentir. Okay, so type A for IR verbs only has two different stem changes, as shown in these diagrams. However, before we get there, here are some examples of the IR type A stem changes. Okay, first one using sentir, second one using dormir. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty in these sentences, triggering the use of the underlined subjunctive verbs. If somebody prefers that you do something, all right, that typically hasn't happened yet, and if somebody wants you to do something, again, both of those verbs, prefers and wants in the present, good triggers for present subjunctive tense. Actions that may not ever happen, who knows if you're going to actually feel better or if you're going to sleep more. Those things might not change, but they very well could. Therefore, subjunctive is needed to express that uncertainty. Okay, and then this would be the second of the IR stem changes in the present subjunctive, type B, as opposed to what we saw previously in type A. And the thing that makes this different than AR-ER verbs, which are just strictly boot, which makes it different than type A, which is two different stem changes within one chart, is that this type has the same stem change, one, in all persons. And if you notice, there's no yellow or green color coding here, because is E to I, and that's the only type of type B IR stem change, in every single person. Notice the I is present within the entire chart on both the left and the right examples. So first plural is included. It's not left out like it would be with AR-ER, and it's the same, not different than it would be comparing type B to type A. It's the same as every other person in this context. Okay, again, a lot of information, but not too many verbs that follow these rules, so Just a few to be mindful of, maybe take some notes on and practice. And here are some examples of those two, pedir and servir. Again, the first parts of these sentences implying and triggering the use of subjunctive, implying uncertainty. If somebody suggests that we do something, pedir, to ask for, has to be in the subjunctive, the present subjunctive. If somebody insists that you serve the meal at a specific time, hasn't happened yet, it could only be noon right now, and they want it done at 6. 6 hasn't happened. Who knows if you're going to serve it at 6? You may not. But that's why sirvas is in the present subjunctive, because it hasn't happened yet, may not happen, a lot of uncertainty going on. If you have any questions at this time, we'll pause for a brief moment, and you can send those in to Zach. All right, we're about halfway through, so we will continue here in 1 second. Okay, we're going to transition here into the next category, or the next type of verb within the present subjunctive, and that is known as the spelling change group. I made a reference to these previously on one of the first few slides when we talked about hugar. And basically, these spell changes apply to all persons, as you can see in the note above. They use regular present subjunctive endings without accents. And they are not stem changing verbs. So it's not the vowel in the stem that's undergoing a change, but rather the letter typically before the infinitive ending, or letters, that undergo some kind of unusual, irregular spelling change. So there are 7 types. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, sorry. All right, and you can see those on the left side. And as you go through this chart, the spelling change is shown to you, and the irregular thing that occurs for these types of verbs is shown to you in the second column. So a verb that ends in CAR, that C is going to change to QU in every person within the entire conjugation chart. Sakar, the verb to take, is an example of that. And if you were to write out the chart to say that, something like, I hope that he takes a lot of pictures, at the party, at the wedding, at the game, all right? I may take a lot of pictures. Sake is how that first singular would be pronounced. And that QU is going to be present in the whole conjugation. Sake, 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 sakemos, and saken. No accents. And since it's an AR verb, it takes the opposite endings that start with an E, the present subjunctive endings. And then you can kind of just follow this down, go through the chart. When you have a little bit more time, the one thing or a few things I will point out, there's an exception to the CER verbs. Haser will not follow this rule. Haser is considered regular in subjunctive, present subjunctive at least. And desir, the example in the CIR group, that is also considered regular in present subjunctive. And then the 2 that are in that light blue color are just like hugar. Okay, they have 2 things going on, both a stem change and a spell change. So the spell change is shown to you here on this chart. GU changing to G, removing the U, and Z changing to C. But what you can see underlined on the very right side of those 2 is the stem change as well. Segir, the E becomes an I, and since it's an IR verb, it would be that type B where it's E to I in every person. Since comenzar is an AR verb, it also stem changes, but within the boot. So that yellow, first plural, is not stem changed. It would be outside of the boot if you were to put a conjugation chart together for it. So this is definitely a good chart to keep handy and to reference, when working on anything present subjunctive. All right, definitely a little bit unusual. It takes some getting used to and some practice. So we do encourage you to, review this and take your time when you get to that portion of your Spanish course. And here are just a couple examples, right, using some of those spelling change verbs. again, just like everything we've talked about today, the beginning part of each of these sentences, I hope and they require, I fear and it's possible, all implying, in these contexts, all implying uncertainty, requiring the use of present subjunctive for the underlined verbs. Things that haven't happened yet, again, things that may never happen. And I hope that they don't keep shouting or yelling. Okay, they may very well keep yelling or shouting. Maybe they're neighbors who you can't control and not quite sure what's going to happen. All right, you're hopeful that it doesn't happen anymore, that it does stop, but it's possible that it could continue going. Okay, so just a few examples there of the spelling change verbs. Notice the stem change in sigan and the stem change in empecemos, or the lack thereof since it's first plural. And then just spell changes for conduzca, C to Z, and toque, C to QU. All right, we will transition now. We're going to change up our topic from present subjunctive to imperfect subjunctive. And again, if you attended or viewed the first part of the subjunctive webinar series, you will have learned a little bit about this already. But we're going to start here by talking about the fact that imperfect subjunctive, unlike present subjunctive, it doesn't actually have any irregular verbs. And the reason for that is because all of its conjugations are rooted in or based in preterite tense conjugations. So being familiar with all things preterite, one of the past simple tenses, that's key to being able to conjugate this tense appropriately and accurately. Okay, so that really is the only thing we're going to talk about as far as imperfect subjunctive is concerned. All right, there's really not a whole lot as far as irregular verbs, like we said. There is a lot of information about it, though, in the first series, the first part of the series, if you do want to take some time to go back and review that or review that for the first time. Okay, however, in subjunctive perfect, which is yet another tense, right? Now we're talking about a compound tense, meaning its conjugations are made up of multiple parts. All right, the second part of any perfect or compound tense is a past participle, the first part being the conjugation of the helping verb haber, which means to have. So just to review, subjunctive perfect translates as something that may have happened or might have happened. Okay, so if you were to say something like, she may have opened the window because it was too hot inside, abrir is an irregular past participle. Right? If you know anything about regular past participles, typically in Spanish they end in ADO or IDO. But this list here is a group of irregular past participles that would be used as the second part of all subjunctive perfect conjugations. Right? The first part, as we discussed in the previous webinar, would be the conjugation of haber into the present subjunctive tense, starting with haya, H-A-Y-A. So if you were to say that, I might have opened the window if it got too hot, you would say yo haya abierto la ventana. Okay, so these past participles come up before. They're going to come up quite a bit in your program. We do have some, new resources as far as worksheets and things like that, on the academic resources page if you want to practice your skills with those. There are answer keys that go along with it as well. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment before we start to discuss our last topic today, which would be commands. If you have any questions for Zach at this time, please feel free to send them in right now. Okay, so as we work towards the last portion of today's webinar. We're going to discuss commands, all right? Basically telling one person or multiple people what to do or what not to do. Okay, and there are two types of commands, all right, in Spanish. Informal, for someone you know, someone you're familiar with, and formal, for either one person you don't really know, or a group of people, regardless of your relationship or lack thereof with them. So most of Spanish commands deal with subjunctive tense, right? 75% of them, 3/4. The other 25% or 1/4 deals with present tense, present indicative. So we'll explain how that works here. All right, so the first type of command is known as an informal command, and it is also known as a to command. All right, when you're addressing one person who you're familiar with, a friend, a relative, etc. Someone you can be a little bit more casual with and not as, respectful or, unfamiliar with. And as far as giving a command in Spanish, the way to form a command, all right, is shown to you here, at least the beginning portion of it. If it's a positive informal command, if you're telling someone you know that they should do something, like that they should speak, if you say to them, speak louder, please, or speak more clearly, please. In this case, this is the only one of the types we're going to discuss here to wrap up today's webinar that doesn't deal with present subjunctive. It actually is just formed by using the third singular present indicative conjugation. So if you notice, the verb is hablar, right? It ends in an A. Habla is third singular in present indicative. So the way to tell the difference would be based on context, right? If this sentence says like ella habla mucho, that means she speaks a lot. But if it was a command, there really wouldn't be a subject. It would just simply say habla, and then whatever the rest of it was. Speak louder, speak more clearly, etc. So context clues kind of give it away. But this is the only one of the commands in Spanish that doesn't deal with present subjunctive. It actually uses present indicative, simply the present tense, regular endings. But in this case, positively using third singular only. A little bit contradictory with the name, the two commands, but indeed accurate. If, however, you were giving a negative command to someone you know and asking them not to do something, for instance, not to speak, do not speak, now the rule is different. For a negative informal or a negative to command, you're going to use second singular present subjunctive. So if you notice, no hables, obviously insert the no to make any verb negative in Spanish. And since hablar is an AR verb, since we're dealing with present subjunctive now, es is your second singular ending. Opposite endings for present subjunctive, no longer using regular endings because this is not present indicative. So this is the first type of command that deals with subjunctive, present subjunctive conjugations. All right, and as always, just like the tenses, commands also have irregular verbs. Okay, and there are 8 irregular informal verbs. All right, shown to you on the first column here, from decir down to venir. To command somebody positively for these, you would use one of these in the third column that have to be memorized. And that is the full command. For instance, the word di, means tell or say. So if you wanted somebody to tell the truth, di la verdad. You don't have to add anything to those positive informal words shown to you here. If you ever heard somebody say ten cuidado in Spanish, that means be careful, or ven aquí, come here. Okay, some of the more common commands. Negatively, however, they still use the second subjunctive. So only the positive informal irregulars have to be memorized. They do not follow the rules we just discussed. That's why they're irregular. Negatively, however, they do use second subjunctive. A little bit different. So a good list of 8 to memorize. Okay, as we transition to formal commands, the other type of command, also known as usted or ustedes commands, they have different uses. An usted formal command is used, with one person you're unfamiliar with, someone you're, not friends with, not related to, or just trying to show respect to. Whereas the ustedes form, the plural form, is used with a group of people, more than one person, familiar and unfamiliar, whether you know them or you don't know them. And in this case, you do have to follow 3 steps, but the good thing is there's only one set of rules for both positive and negative, different than informal commands where there are separate rules, both positive and negative. So as the slide shows you here, there are 3 steps. Conjugate the first person singular present indicative, so you're using present tense as the root, dropping the O, and then adding the subjunctive endings for third singular or third plural. Third singular being usted, third plural being ustedes. Okay, so you must follow those 3 rules if it is basically a regular formal command. And just as a reminder, these are your subjunctive endings for third singular and third plural. AR on the top, using the opposite endings, the letter E or EN, and IR using the letter A or the letters AN. And you have some common examples down below. All right, if you're speaking to someone you don't know very well, one person, hable, if you're commanding them to speak. If it's a group of people, insert the no and use the plural ending, no hablen. And then same thing, escribir is an IR verb, takes the opposite endings, as you can see up top. One person being commanded to write something, escriba, but a group of people commanded not to write, no escriban. Okay, so those are your required endings for usted or ustedes formal commands. Same endings as present subjunctive tense. That's what commands are rooted in, at least these commands. And as I mentioned earlier, you would be seeing these 5 verbs again. We talked about these as the irregular verbs in present subjunctive. They are also used as the irregular usted and ustedes forms for formal commands. So these are the verbs you can't follow those 3 steps for. You can't just conjugate to first singular and drop the O, because if you think about dar, first singular present indicative is doi, estar is estoy, ir is voy, saber is say, and ser is soy. None of them ended in O, therefore they are irregular and must follow these present subjunctive spellings. So if you tell a group of people to be here at 8 o'clock, you would say estén aquí a las 8. If you're telling somebody to be nice, one person, sea simpático. Again, if you don't know that person, formally speaking. Okay, I'll pause for a moment before we wrap up the webinar for today. If you have any questions for Zach right now, please feel free to send them in, and then we will get this wrapped up shortly. Okay, the last part of today's webinar still has to do with commands, but more specifically focused on pronoun placement. Again, you may have either viewed some webinars on object and reflexive pronouns, right? We have plenty of resources on them. If you happen to have a pronoun within a command, a word like it, the word lo, for instance, as you can see in these 2 examples, right? Or if the verb is reflexive, if let's say a parent is telling their child to, wash up, okay, for instance, that verb is reflexive. You're doing it to yourself. If it is a positive command, regardless of the type of command, as it says up top, this applies to all commands, both types, informal and formal. If the command is positive and you happen to have an object or a reflexive pronoun in that context. The two words combine. You attach the pronoun to the command in a positive context, regardless of formal or informal. So let's say somebody was telling you to put the book, which is masculine and singular, el libro, replaced by lo. The book, el libro, lo meaning it, referring to the book. Put it, on the shelf. Ponlo. Two words become one, combining them. However, in a negative context, you would simply put the pronoun, regardless of type, object or reflexive, before the command, after the no. So between the no and the command. So if you said don't put it on the floor, put it on the shelf, no lo pongas, en el suelo, ponlo en el estante. So this applies to all types of commands, and it's very easily broken down, positive versus negative. Attaching for positive, separating for negative. Okay, we know that is a lot of information, okay, but that does conclude our webinar today. If you still need further assistance as you come across this topic or any other in your course, please don't hesitate to contact us during our business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 Eastern Time. You can reach us via email, chat, text, or even set up an appointment. So if you do need help, we're happy to help, and we wish you buena suerte or good luck in Spanish. If you have any final questions for Zach, you can send those in now. Have a great day. Thanks for your attention.